Come on, come on. Listen to what I say.
Hello and welcome to Raising Up the Vote, the power of allyship. I'm Amelia Domenko, the President and CEO of the Women's Business Development Center. I want to thank you all for joining us today as we come together virtually for an important conversation on the importance of allyship. Today we will discuss how civic engagement and allyship go hand in hand, and how the responsibility of sustainable change and equality falls on the shoulders of all of us, from the actions of us as individual women and men to the actions of organizations and other collective groups who are inherently involved in the greater fabric of society. We are pleased to be joined by an impactful group of roundtable participants today who will each supply their own unique experiences and perspectives on the topic of allyship, informed from their varying backgrounds and areas of expertise. We thank each of our participants for enhancing today's conversation with their thought-provoking insight. As we are recording today, just days away from the 2020 election, I am reminded of why we started this initiative, and it was to ensure that the voices of all women, especially women of color, and all underrepresented members of the community are heard through the democratic process of voting, not only in this national election, but future elections at all levels, regardless of party affiliation. With Election Day on the horizon, I remind you that our role during the home stretch to November 3rd is critical in ensuring equal representation of all people. I encourage each and every one of you to continue to raise up the vote within your personal and professional networks and within your communities as we approach Election Day. It is our hope that the important conversations we share today reach far beyond our attendees. The power of allyship is the second event of our Raising Up the Vote movement. Since we last met, we experienced the tremendous loss of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. As we continue to discuss the fundamental objectives of raising up the vote, such as economic self-sufficiency and leveling the playing field so that everyone can have an equal chance at competing professionally, the WBDC reflects on the memory and work of Justice Ginsburg. She was one of our nation's greatest advocates for gender equality. As she once stated, women's rights are an essential part of the overall human rights agenda, trained on the equal dignity and ability to live in freedom all people should enjoy. It's now the responsibility of today's women, as well as our allies, to take on the torch passed down by Justice Ginsburg and the many other change makers who have served their time advocating for women's issues as human issues. Now, I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Colleen Bell. Colleen is familiar with hosting enlightening conversations related to race and gender, as she regularly does this within the lecture halls and classrooms at Hamline University, where Colleen teaches as a professor in women's studies and as a professor and co-director in conflict studies. Colleen, thank you for being a part of the WBDC's Raising Up the Vote initiative and guiding this important conversation on the power of allyship.
Raise your hands up. Raise them up. Hey. Come
to today's moderated conversation, Raising Up the Vote, the Power of Allyship. We will explore ways to advocate together for a more equal and just workplace, a more equal and just community, and a more equal and just planet. I'm Colleen Bell, Professor Emeritus of Conflict Studies and Women's and Gender Studies at Hamline University. I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm honored to introduce three extraordinary women who have raised their voices and their vote to create positive change in their organizations and their communities. They are trailblazers who fought for their voice and their rights, have become civically engaged, and have changed their worlds. Today's guests are Kenya McKnight Ahad, CEO and founder of Black Women's Wealth Alliance, Lili Hall, founder, CEO, and president of NOC, Inc., and Erryn Williams, Global Inclusion and Diversity Lead at Cargill. Each participant will have time to introduce themselves and share their story, followed by a moderated conversation on how civic engagement and allyship are intertwined. Guests will cover their understanding of civic engagement and collective allyship, what it means to them as individuals, as business leaders, and as community members. And finally, why it's crucial to advocate for systems change. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Kenya McKnight Ahad. Kenya.
Thank you for having me. So I come this morning, first of all, with grace and gratitude for being able to share in this conversation, and especially in this moment where we're faced with many things, and our, voting issues being at the front of that, alongside the racial tensions and dynamics historic to this country that we're grappling with, as a core of really deciding, re-investigating who we are, who we'll be. That's all defined by where we are in these moments. This conversation on allyship for me is one that is also deep and important because it can mean a variety of different things. And I think we all have a role to play as allies across the spectrum, across our cultures, across our genders, and certainly across our socioeconomic statuses. But the question is, where do we lie? Where do we stand? And what are we an ally to? And is that allyship the same as solidarity? And I beg to say that there's a difference between both. But it is a question we have to answer. How far are we willing to go? And what are we willing to stand for? And for how long? Is it transactional? Or is it something that we're committed to through this lifetime to build a better, a stronger, a more equitable future for the generations of young folks coming after us and those who are standing with us? And I think this is a moment to also think through how historically allyship has been also sort of a branding, a brand that gets carried, that changes through time, right? How it has had its transactional moments, how it has been hindered by differences when true allyship centers on differences. It centers on our ability to support those and that which is different from ourselves, but we still seek value in its importance and its relevance and its credibility and its existence. And so I'm here today to add value to that aspect of the discussion and push the bar on how far are we willing to go, and what and who will we stand for and against. It's not enough for us to just show up at rallies. It's not enough for us to put up Black Lives Matter signs in our yards. It's not enough for us to just make social media posts. It's not enough, for us to just say, get out to vote. We have to search our consciousness deep from where we are now, but also from the traumas we carry from generations of people that we've lived through, right? We carry their legacies and stories, knowingly or not, through our thinking, through our behaviors that show up in the results of our lives, of the things we do, of the places we're in, the access we provide or deny, the opportunities we hold or we share. I mean, all of those things matter. The things we speak up on, or the things we speak against, or the things we're silent about. Those are all elements that allies, true allies, have to investigate within themselves. And so I wanted to open up and start with that statement. And then I'll take these next few moments to talk a little bit about my journey, my leadership journey as a business leader, as a community leader, and as a human being. And I am the president, CEO, and founder of the Black Women's Wealth Alliance, an institution that is a for-profit, but that is focused on the social impact of wealth building, generational wealth building for what I identify as historical Black women across the United States. We start here in our place of Minnesota. And for us, our work centers greatly on the historical, economic, and financial trauma that Black people have experienced in this country from the history of white violence towards Black economics. Our job is to help Black women understand their economic position, power, and opportunity to build generational Black wealth from the 60% of the Black dollar that they control, but also how to maximize their value proposition in the workplace and also as entrepreneurs by building the skills, knowledge, and social capital necessary to be successful in their goals of building economic stability and generational prosperity. In that, it is a very difficult journey and work because it is both historical and something that challenges the ideas of women and economic prosperity today, and what that means for Black women who we know make less than maybe 60 cents on the dollar, 69 cents. And what does that mean for our families that we are generationally, raising through cycles of poverty that we're trying to break, cycles of lack of access to capital, to real asset building, right, to promotions in the workplace, to validity for who we are. And while we are proud to be the first of many things, we're also the last on the totem pole when it comes to our prosperity, when it comes to our rights. In fact, in our this year celebrating the rights to vote, the 100-year anniversary right to vote for women, that was not also true for Black women. It took longer for us to establish our rights to vote. So in that, it is important that we continue to remember that this journey is ongoing and that Black women are still struggling in the workplace of being able to wear their own natural hairs and, things like that. And so these are a lot of issues that we champion in our work in helping Black women understand it through the economic lens. Some of this, I talked about the historical structures of racism that results in inequality. And that is experienced by many people. And specifically, I'll talk a little bit about Black women and what that means. And for me, when we talk about allyship, when we talk about women's right, when we talk about, equal pay, when we talk about the right to vote, when we talk about women being advanced in the workplace, we have to remember the struggles and that Black women broke down a lot of barriers for women in this country. In fact, we're looking at the first woman to be nominated running on a major DFL ticket for vice president, who's also a Black woman. So in that, we need to always be mindful that while we're talking about time off for children, for mothers in the workplace, Black women were having babies in the cotton fields. There was no time off for that. We talk about sexual misconduct in the workplace. We have Anita Hill and others who pioneered these issues that did not receive great support and validity for how Black women are sexualized, not only in the workplace, but in the public sphere. When we talk about equal pay, we have to remember that Black women were making a lot less than we do now. For years to come in this country, we've been in the workforce since Caucasians have been in the United States. Black women have been on the forefront of forceful labor working. So we have to always remember those who came before us and the challenges they face. And when we see ourselves advancing them, we have to ask ourselves why and how, and what is our role to help bridge those gaps. It is not a matter of intelligence. It is not a matter of education. And it's not always a matter of skill. Black women hold some of the most highest percentage of education, academically educated women in this country. But that does not change choice and opportunity and access to that, right? And so we've got to ask these questions of why and recognize those historical structures of power, of race, of exclusion that has kept us out of that, and understand how it's tied to our economic futures, collectively, but also specifically. To uphold the Black woman is to uphold the Black nation, because a nation rises no higher than its woman. And the conditions of the Black woman will always dictate the conditions of the Black nation. So our championship around poverty has to center greatly on Black women's access to economic stability and prosperity. And I'll close and say that I talked a little bit about the Black Women's Wealth Alliance already, but equity, access, justice, and the social impact are critical aspects of allyship work. And we've got to make sure that it's not just a hashtag, that it's not just a marketing campaign, but that it centers on those four aspects. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Kenya. And I know that we're going to come back to a number of the themes that you introduced. Our second guest today is Lili Hall. Lili.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for including me in this conversation. I'm Lili Hall. I'm the founder and CEO of NOC, which is a full experience creative agency that I founded back in 2001. We're headquartered here in Minneapolis, but we have staff in Chicago, New York, and in Miami. I'll share a little bit about my background. I was actually born in Chicago and to a Brazilian mother, and my parents decided to move to Brazil when I was 5. My dad saw the developing opportunities in Brazil much earlier than most, and so we packed our bags and bought 5 one-way tickets and moved to Recife, which is in the northeast of Brazil. We were there to stay, and so we were immersed in Brazilian schools. I actually forgot English and had to learn English when I returned to the US. And so I would say that I think having had those experiences of living in 2 different cultures, I've always had this sort of foot in one place and foot in another, and never necessarily feeling like I really belonged anywhere. So it's been an interesting journey, and I've been reflecting a lot, especially now with just all the dynamic conversations that are happening, not just here in Minneapolis or in the US, but also globally, the tensions and racism and classism that exist in Brazil as well. And so having these dialogues with family here and family overseas has been pretty interesting. So I founded NOC, and I self-funded. So I bootstrapped the company and really didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I was embarking on, but just kept persevering. And, today we employ close to 90 employees in the US. And it's been quite fascinating. About a decade ago, we decided to move our offices to North Minneapolis. So we're in the Harrison neighborhood. And when we arrived, I wasn't quite sure how the community or the neighborhood would feel about, this business moving in. But right away, we felt very welcomed. We're across from a school. I remember somebody from the school coming over and thanking us for moving here and building such a gorgeous building and employing people in the neighborhood. And so I think for me, really recognizing kind of our role in the community, especially in North, wasn't that we weren't, our headquarters were here, but what else were we going to do? We were, it was important for us to get involved in the community. And so we immediately started collaborating with quite a few of the nonprofits in the area, the Link, Youth Link, Venture North, and then early on with Juxtaposition Arts and a few others in the community. And so I think it's been an interesting experience for myself, but also for our employees, especially employees who did not grow up in this area, to get involved, to really want to connect with our neighbors and then to do work in helping improve our neighborhood. And so it's been an interesting 10 years here, and we've learned a lot and we've made a lot of friends, and it's been pretty incredible. I would say, obviously, most recently since the murder of George Floyd, it's been a very complicated time for us and for our employees and for our neighbors. And so I think it just puts a bigger spotlight on the work that needs to be done and the work that we need to continue to do. And as Kenya just said, this isn't a hashtag, this isn't a marketing campaign. For us, it's a lifestyle. We've invested here, we live here. And asking ourselves every day, what can we do to make it better?
Thank you so much, Lili. That context really will help us as we go on in the conversation. And next is Erryn Williams. Erryn.
Hello. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. I think that these types of conversations are so important in helping us to really focus on the action and how do we help both our communities and, for myself, our organizations move further faster. And so my name is Erryn Williams. I am the Global Inclusion and Diversity Strategy Lead for Cargill. Cargill is one of the largest privately held firms in the world and focused on really our higher purpose of nourishing the world. So we're in the industry of food and agriculture. If you're not familiar with our organization, which is a purpose that I think all of our employees hold dearly to themselves, because we know that we are impacting communities everywhere. But I think that that's where we have really done some additional thinking and reflection as an organization in terms of that purpose. So there are other ways for us to help and support the community, and I'll get to that in a little bit. What I did want to do was, at least in starting with my story, the lens in which I bring inclusion, diversity, allyship, equity, those important key elements to my space. And so I'm actually born and raised in Los Angeles, California, and lived and grew up in school systems where there weren't enough books for the students to read. We had to share books or hope that our teachers could, for example, get copies of the different assignments so that we can share, and knowing or believing that's the new norm, right? Or that's the norm at the time. And I think and reflect about today and the issues that we have in the communities where there's not Wi-Fi for all of the children, and seeing that, it's going generation after generation. But one of the elements that really stands out for me is that I actually lived just a couple blocks away from where the Rodney King riot started. And I remember the day that they started. I remember the phone call from my parents making sure that, are you in the house? because something's going on in the streets. And having the conversations with my parents, my community members, my teachers on these systematic inequities that were happening generation over generation. And then that was happening for me. Now I'm the mom of 2 sons. Sons that were sitting in the living room with me watching on TV, similar things where buildings were burning and people were out there talking about their rights to have an equitable opportunity to succeed. They want health care. They want the same economic opportunities. They want the same educational opportunities. And having those conversations with my son. And so that is what fuels me, because I don't want my son to have those similar conversations with his sons and his daughters. And so that really helped fuel at least my passion of wanting to learn more and eventually my studies in school. But I do want to bring up the first time that I saw the power of allyship and the power of allyship within corporate America. And that's the lens that I will hope to bring to the conversation today. I just read an article in the last couple of days that 73% of the people who took this poll, Americans, believe that corporations and organizations play a profound role in helping us make a difference. In fact, they believe more strongly that corporations can help than the government. So that's saying a lot in terms of the role that we have to play as a member of the community, which is not a role that many organizations are used to playing. But the first time that I was able to see that ally was within my first role in human resources. My chief HR officer, this is a while ago in Los Angeles. So this is at the very beginning of this space and this movement of corporate America and the inclusion, diversity, and equity space. And he brought me in the office and said, when I sit at the boardroom or when I'm in the meetings and I look around the room, I don't see the diversity that is within our organization, that's within our communities, and I want to make that change. And while I personally believe that to have a white male leader in such a significant role share that same comment was really powerful to me. He was an ally. He was willing to put his own capital on the line to help make changes. And I think one of the questions that we reflecting on is, what does allyship mean to us? For me, allyship is really using your privilege, but not just your privilege, your economic, your social, your political, your professional capital to help someone else. So that means you have to give of yourself to help someone else. And so that's really active allyship. And while I applaud, and I think Kenya mentioned it before, the efforts of wanting to do training or reading a book or learning, those things are really great, but I call that a neutral observer. You're not an ally until you're actively putting something of yourself for someone else, like voting. Are you voting just within the lens and the benefit of you, or are you benefiting the collective community? And so those are different ways. And when I start to see leaders in the boardroom, when I start to see leaders in these organizations who are willing to take those types of sacrifices, then those are who I call active allies. And I've seen that in several parts of my career. I've had the benefit of working in several large organizations here in the Twin Cities who are all committed to helping make this change, having helped them with a number of efforts, whether it be recruiting diverse talent, working with organizations on mentorship or sponsorship programs, but also how do we work with strategic partners within the community so that we can all work on this together. And so I'm also on the board of Bridging, another organization who helps homeless as they transition back into housing and helping them, have a bed to lie on, utensils to eat, because there's something to be said for having not just a house, but a home. And so how do we help communities as they also transition into over time? And I look forward in this conversation to bringing to light on what either we can do individually to be active allies, but also what we can do as organizations, not just as the organization, but even working amongst them, each other and across different communities and industries to really make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Erryn. before we go into the moderated conversation, I would like to offer a few of my opening remarks. And it's wonderful to have the advantage of being the fourth in a string of four, because I will be probably echoing ideas that others have shared. I wanted to start by saying something about my life experience as a white woman. It's very important to acknowledge the privilege and power that I was born into. And of course, like all of us, I was socialized by the world around me. So I was born on an Air Force base in Great Falls, Montana, which pushes onto the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana. And before I was a year old, my parents moved back to my mother's family farm, where I spent the first 10 years of my childhood, surrounded by generations of elders. I grew up on this farm with 3 houses. My great-grandmother lived in one, my grandparents lived in another, and I lived in a third one with my parents and my 2 younger siblings. My great-grandmother was an important part of my childhood. She had moved to what was then the prairie. It was Dakota land. She arrived with a horse and wagon, which, are stories that as kids we read, but, she moved to that part of Iowa in around 1870, I guess. And so shortly after the Dakota War. And so as a young woman, she heard firsthand stories from her parents about something that happened in that tiny corner of Iowa, which I would not call, but the white residents called, the Spirit Lake Massacre. So I grew up as a child at her knee, hearing horrible images of Native people. And of course, it was told from a white settler perspective. I know that this shaped me deeply and probably is part of the spark that has fueled my interest in understanding cultural difference and other kinds of difference. My first teaching job was in Baltimore, Maryland, first paid teaching job, where I lived in East Baltimore, very close to Johns Hopkins Hospital, where I was working with children. It was an African-American neighborhood, poor, but it was the first time for me being in a community where I was a numerical minority. And I learned a great deal from that. I feel like the kind of humility that is so important in conversations about power and privilege, whether we're talking about race or gender or class or ability, disability. I feel like humility is very important for persons who are privileged by whatever those identities are. I wanted to also say a little bit about allyship and my struggle with that word. Alicia Garza, who's one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, has said some very has made some critical points about allyship, pointing out that it's very often thought of as an individual act. And the problem with that is that it becomes a commodity. So am I a better ally than you are? Or what do I get back? So the transactional piece that Kenya brought up, what do I get back for being an ally? And so I think that as we use that word, it's important that we think carefully about a broader, a more community sense. Of course, we operate as individuals, but we're always part of the social fabric that surrounds us. Although particularly people with privilege are not aware of that as consistently as would be useful. I also have thought a lot about the word community, and how I behave in the world is very much shaped by what I think of as my community. I think that that's also a useful point that we might come back to. And then the notion of help, which I think comes up with allyship a lot. Help is a power relationship. This is something I learned when I went with a group of students to Jamaica, and we were living and working in an interior community, guided by the locals who instructed us about building a library in a little town, but we brought the resources. So the notion of help was the subject of an essay that we read. When we talk about help, we are implying that, for example, I have something that another person needs. They may not have asked for it. And the implication is that I know what this person needs, even though they haven't asked for it. I guess one other thing that I think about is comfort zones and willingness to be brave and take risks. I'm very much aware that the dominant society defines comfort zones. And I also know as a teacher that we do not learn when we're always in our comfort zone. And so I want to make a commitment to step outside my comfort zone, be brave enough to do that. And I hope that that will also support the conversation that we're going to have as we move forward. Very, very honored to be here with my fellow discussants. And I thank you all for your generous sharing of those powerful words. So now that we have some context of each other's standpoints, each other's experiences, it's time to launch into the conversation. I have a few questions to frame or prompt our interaction. And I am a person who moderates lightly. So I'm going to depend on people to leap in. I will try to make connections with the earlier comments people made in opening up the floor. So the first area of question is something that each of the opening remarks touched on a bit, which is people's leadership journeys and paths to community engagement. To build on the comments that we've all made about allyship and power and help, I think it would be interesting and maybe push our conversation forward to talk about your understanding of leadership. How do you think about it? What does it mean? How do you practice it? Assuming that leadership happens in a power context. How does that play out in each of your work lives and then community lives? What is leadership?
So starting off, I'll go ahead and kind of jump in. Just from an organizational perspective, obviously, within this context, leaders are generally those within an organization of influence. Leaders are also those who have been, by either roles or responsibilities, given a certain of accountability over a group, a team, a project, those types of things. But I also know that there are organic leaders within the organization. And so, I think that in every one of those groups, we all have an opportunity or have the ability to make impact and have an impact specifically within this space, and supporting others. And so, as I think about inclusion, equity, and diversity within the organization, we typically have in this space leaders who are at the bottom, or who are the employees in general, and they traditionally make up, for example, maybe employee resource groups, or others who are passionate about the ability to make changes within the organization's culture and the processes or in their policies, and they can do it within their collective voice. So if we get a number of people who have similar values or believes that these types of changes need to make in the organization, they can come together. And for the most part, I would say many organizations support those communities through what I've called employee resource groups. But then you have what are traditionally our leaders, who are our executive teams, your CEOs, the vice presidents, those who run either regional or parts of the business. And they, by definition within the organization, do have, and they are really a pivotal point in the culture and the beliefs and the vision when it comes to how the organization lives and breathes. And so you definitely have these leaders. But to be honest with you, in order to actually make change within an organization, it's the leaders in the middle that we're still struggling to have an impact with. I call that the frozen middle, the frozen tundra, because those are the leaders who are ultimately hiring, for example. Those are the leaders who are deciding where we're going to promote. Those are the leaders who live and breathe the culture of an organization. And those are the leaders that have a suggestive power that really allows and enables an organization to achieve its goals. And those are traditionally of the dominant group. So they aren't necessarily either familiar, or they don't know what to do, or they don't know their role or see themselves in this fight, is what I would call it. So how do we help them want to not just be neutral? Because they feel like neutral is okay, right? How do we help them want to be active? How do we help them see that it really benefits the collective community if we're all in this together? And I'm not saying we've solved the problem, but we realize that's the work to be done.
I'll say that starting out, I just want to piggyback on something. I struggle, words shape thoughts. And I think that when I hear words like dominant, and dominant culture, or, privilege and things like that, what comes to mind is false power. And how we feed into the idea of white supremacy, and how that also breeds the notion that someone else is inferior. So I invite us to think about different language we're using. I don't think white culture is dominant necessarily in its sense. I think that, because white people or Caucasians in the United States are the majority of the population, right? It means that they influence the culture, right? It means that they have access to things that other people don't, and that they don't have to have the same considerations that folks who are in a smaller population of them do. And so there's a lot that results from that, which we're talking about today. But when you describe it as dominant, it seems to me that someone else is inferior to that dominance, and that isn't true at all. So, and it plays into people's ideas that somehow they're better than when they're not. And so I just invite us to think through how the language we use shapes how people might understand who they are and what they are. Dominance is not what they are. That's just a position based on their population size, not because of intelligence or skill or any of those things. So I just want to point that out first, and just kind of how it's affecting me hearing it. And every time I hear it, it bothers me. Because we have to deal with the result of that, the behavior, and it's just not true. Just because you're Caucasian don't mean you're smarter than somebody who's not, or better than. But, you know, so we need to just work on that. Leadership, first of all, there's different types of leaders, you know, right? And, you know, there are leaders who just speak. There are leaders of institutions. There are, you know, leaders, you know, across children. To me, leaders do what's needed, what's required, right? It's the person that's willing to pick up the paper that everybody walks over. That's leadership to me. It implies responsibility and action. And to lead is to follow. So to be a teacher is to be a student. So it is one that is also actively learning and engaging, and their responsibility is drawn off of the needs of the very thing they're leading, right? And so for me, it is both personal. It was taught to me from my great grandmother, who raised nearly 5 generations of us in Kankakee, Illinois, where I'm originally from. I've spent the last 38 years of my life in Minneapolis, 36 living on the north side, so I'm a north sider. Harrison is the first neighborhood I lived in on the north side, as many and most African Americans did, as it was a place where we were concentrated into public housing, low-income housing. So it is the historical story of Black people in Minneapolis and Minnesota. So that neighborhood that's now called Heritage Park as well embodies our story and our journey in Minnesota, particularly on the north side. I just want to make sure that's known. It's turning into something different now, but it is certainly the pathway by which we all entered Minneapolis for the most part. So leadership, you know, you have to have somebody following you, or something you care about, or something you're responsible for to lead. How I practice it is through my values, and through that which I am, you know, vested in and interested in and commissioned by, to act in responsibility, not only just to speak, but to do, and to change actively with my hands, with my resources, and with everything in me. And that's part of how I stand in my work with the Black Women's Wealth Alliance. It's also rooted in my spirituality, but ultimately what I care about and what I'm willing to put on the line to do something about, to change.
You know, for me, I think, you know, I it's such an interesting question, because I think people make assumptions around titles and roles and within organizations. I think, you know, I have always been interested in servant leadership. And so when I look at our staff and our community, you know, how can I serve our staff and our leaders and help people grow? And I think that is something that is really important to the culture here at NOC, is that we aren't, it's, you know, I really fight the hierarchy, and I get in trouble a lot because I try to keep the organization flat. And as we grow, there's, you know, that can create some tension because people want to keep getting raised up in terms of their titles, and, you know, being able to update their LinkedIn with a new title. And I think there's just a lot of things within organizations and within our country, but, you know, I see the same thing probably more so in a culture like in Brazil, where, you know, people value you more if you have a different kind of title, like doctor or lawyers or so on and so forth. So growing up with this concept that people were more valued, I really, really struggled with. I remember when I launched NOC, I hated titles so much that I actually put down janitor as my title, because I thought that, you know, the person that's behind the scenes, that sort of ignored, and but helps make things beautiful. And I remember getting invited to my first C-suite conference, and I was actually told that I had to get a different business card to attend, which I thought was just so absolutely messed up and fascinating all at the same time. And so I succumbed to the request, but it is pretty interesting, I think, even how people treat you differently once they figure out that you're the CEO or the president. And at times it really bothers me, or they look at me and they ignore a colleague of mine that I'm with. And so there's all kinds of things that I just at times chuckle inside and just like, I'm not any better, smarter. I just happen to be the founder and CEO. That's just what I did. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. And I think that there's a lot more interesting people here at NOC that people should get to know. So I struggle with it, but I know that it's also an opportunity for me to be able to challenge the status quo and be able to have these conversations around titles and roles. The other thing that I went back to school and did a master's, international master's of practicing management. And there was a lot of discussion around leadership and management and this tension, and Erryn touched on it. And it's interesting, Henry Mintzberg is the co-founder of the program, and he always talked about, like, in order to lead, you need to know how to manage. And in order to be a good manager, you need to know how to lead. And so I think, again, I think people want to separate these positions and roles. And so I just am really interested in that concept of being a good manager and being a good leader.
I'm drawing a couple of threads from what each of you has commented on. And first, I want to acknowledge and thank Kenya for calling our attention to the words that we use. Absolutely, the words shaping our thoughts. It's always good to remember that, to be reminded, to be conscious. A couple of the threads that I'm drawing out of these comments have to do with accountability. Leadership having to do with accountability, leadership implying responsibility, and responsiveness, responding to, and also kind of the resistance to hierarchy. And one other piece that Erryn added, which is people wanting to be neutral as opposed to actively engaged. Neutrality supports the existing system. And so, that benefits some people and disadvantages others. I'm trying to make a link to what is happening in the country right now, and wanting us to think about how we turn our crises, how we take anger and frustration and crisis and reframe it into a more regenerative, inclusive, equitable, better world for everyone. How do you envision this world that we would want to move toward? What is your vision? In order to move us, we've got to think about what we want. We know what would be better. We know what doesn't work, but I'm guessing that each of you has particular concerns, ideas about how to take the situation that we're in. I'm thinking about economically, I'm thinking about racial injustice, I'm thinking about public health. What do you envision? What would you want to work toward?
I feel like the struggle for me, when I think about my particular community, is that of human rights, humanity, and the notion that we have to continue to validate that we are just that, human beings, and work through the process and undo all this language, all these processes, all these thinkings. And I really just want to do that. I just want to be. And I imagine most of us do. And I want to work towards a place where life, liberty, we have full access to what is already ours. It's already given. A good quality of life. I look at the differences in our neighborhoods where we live, and we've got to do 20,000 million studies on the Black neighborhood to figure out how to make it better. We can invest $5 billion into building North Loop or something like that in Minneapolis without any studies, just a plan and a strategy and a commitment. And, we've got to invest money into the nonprofit spectrum, communities. If you think about the corporate partners and their focus on nonprofits, which is a great social cause, if you will. But we hesitate investing in the small business and economic development, real asset building ownership aspects, but we care about poverty, right? So these things for me, I want to work towards being able to have opportunities like a North Loop has for a North Minneapolis without it having to show up as completely displacement and gentrification, right? Of our culture, of our ideas, of our values, of things that matter to us, but how to enhance it, And so I want to work towards a place where I don't have to talk about me being a Black person, woman, historically, right, in this context. I don't want to, I want to work towards a place where being a token isn't a strategy for my success, right? To come over the hurdles that even exist in my own community, because we're fighting over, who gets advancement and who gets this little space that's been carved out just for Black people, right? Or Hispanic people. We all have these little places that have been identified for us, right? So, a place where little people like me, the little girl that grew up on the north side in the projects, can really not have to work as hard as I do and have to just be in a place like even today, right? Where I have social capital and things that would help build my capacity to be here without me having to spill my guts to do it, right? Having to fight and work and, right? All of that. Mm-hmm. So that's what I want to work towards.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that more personally, when I wake up in the morning and I send my son off to school or walking to the neighborhood, I don't want to have fear that because he's 13 and no longer a kid, but now he's a threat. That's kind of what the day that I'm looking for. I'm looking for the time when you walk around your neighborhood and your neighbors invite you to their cabin. Those are the times that I'm looking for. And, within an organization, there is a lot of work to do. And there is effort to make equitable programs. But at the end of the day, I want to work myself out of a job. So you don't need me to do the job. But I also know that we can't get from A to Z without going through a number of different parts on the journey. So I recognize that, and I want to use what I have as talents to help others recognize it in whatever capacity. And that's sort of, the work that we're doing, but I also recognize it's really not me. It's going to take all of us in order to do that. But I am hoping of the day that when someone has Williams on their resume, that it won't take 6 to 10 tries before they get, they get a job. Or, when it's time for that promotion, you don't have to do that extra job or work 10 times as hard in order to promote. And so, that's what fuels me, but that's the vision. And that's what I hope to see one day, in the next generation.
I think for me, it's, I have two daughters, almost 17 and almost 22. And I think that when I look at the landscape of what we've been going through the last decade, or especially the last few years, just really thinking about their future and youth in general. A lot of the pro bono work that we do is centered around youth and youth development and the opportunities that we hope that our youth will have in terms of education and jobs. And I think that, for me in particular, and especially around, this time in voting, I've been very, very, very active. And I don't want to get political, but I've been very active in getting more women in office and more diverse people in office, because there isn't the representation that's needed to change policies. And so everything I do now, I do for my girls. I think about their future. I think about them being able to make choices on their bodies and where they work and where they can live and the opportunities that they will hold. But as far as a community and especially here, the involvement that we've been at with some of the youth link and the link, youth at risk, it's just been really, really important to me, because I've had opportunities, and I had a great support system. My mom was really instrumental in making sure that I have 2 older brothers actually. And so I think behind the scenes, she always knew that it might be a little bit harder for me. And so secretly she was pushing me more than she was pushing my brothers, because she knew that it would be more challenging. And as Erryn said, my hope is that there won't be these categories of women-owned or minority-owned businesses, by the time they launch their companies. Hopefully they're launching their companies as humans and not being put in categories and checking boxes and being put in corners.
If I can just say quickly to Erryn and Lili, first of all, I'm a product of Youth Link and Bridge. It used to be called Project Solo in the days. And so as a young person, it was the only real tool that I had, even though they were in South Minneapolis. I was in young North Side. It was an important tool that I even think plays a role into my life today, because they taught me the fundamentals of, self-sufficiency that I could not get at home or in my environment because of everything that surrounded me inside and out. And so I just want to say those are 2 things that are still dear to my heart. And I passionately believe in investing in young people in that way, because I'm a result of what it can be. And hopefully greater than what I've become. Certainly for a lot of young people who struggle as I did, who just need that kind of a support. So thank you for committing to that work, because it made a difference in my life. For the overall panel, I just will end that question part with this, is that I want to be and work towards a place where what my ancestors have already done matters and counts. I don't want to keep doing the work they've already done. That seems to get lost through generations, where we have to do this reset and teach an entire generation of folks who have the ability to just not even consider the things we've struggled and not even know what has happened. And so when their efforts and legacy is held as a value and progress seen and realized in this country, then I feel like I can get to a place where I can be.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking now about the connection between community health and prosperity and businesses. There are so many tendrils, I think, that connect. And I'm just wondering if we could spend a little time thinking about the effect on community health of business prosperity and vice versa. How our business success, and you each have your different perspective. How are business successes connected to community health in positive ways? We know that there are exploitations. Kenya mentioned gentrification, but I'm thinking about what are some strong positive connections between business success and community well-being?
I can start. I mean, I would say that, for me, the role models that I've looked up to have been the bigger corporations, the Cargills, the Targets, Best Buy, General Mills, so on. I mean, we live in a really robust community of Fortune 10s and 100s and 500s. And so I remember at the beginning of NOC just, really thinking about how we could give back and obviously not at the same level, but what could we do to help and give back in our community when I see all these amazing corporations. And so we started doing pro bono work, which, we do probably 6,000 hours per year giving back to the community. And it's just, it's not about getting our name on something. It's I would say for our staff over and over and over, they raise their hand. They want to work on these projects because it means so much to them. And I'll never forget in a performance review, an employee saying, it fuels my soul, in this project and what it meant to me. And so we kept getting more involved and going deeper into some of the nonprofits, as well as minority business owners or immigrant business owners, and just really having an opportunity to collaborate with incredible partners in the community. And so I would say that, we get so much out of these experiences. We learn so much about different communities in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so, and a ton of learning. And so I think it's just, we feel just super grateful and fortunate to have those experiences.
I'm looking at it or thinking about it in a couple of different ways. First, I'm going to start with our employees are the community. So I do want to start with the health and wellness of our employees. That's one piece. We have parents who are also teachers now. We have parents who, who are taking care of multiple generations at home. We have the stress of the current environment. So one way, as at least an organization, we help the community by helping our employees through either a work-life balance, being able to adjust and pivot so that they can do it without adding the additional stress and providing the services there. So those are one, part of it. The other part I think about is the community is our workforce in terms of our talent pipeline, and we have to invest in it because otherwise we're going to keep taking the talent away. And if we don't replenish it, whether it be investing in STEM programs, whether it's investing in mentorship and resources in our schools, which is what we have an amazing foundation, what they do. It doesn't replenish the great talent that ultimately is going to be our future leaders in the future parts of our organization. And so that's an important part. And I think both Lili and Kenya mentioned it maybe even before, but the investment in the community, but not just the investment in nonprofits, but quite frankly, the investment in minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. And so I know that we're even going back and taking a really deep reflection into where do the dollars go, so that they're going directly to the communities, not going to, one nonprofit organization who then takes it to another nonprofit who then takes it to another organization. How do we get the dollars directly into the hands of those who are making an impact into the community? And so those are just a number of different ways I know that we're looking at or are actively trying to tackle or play a role.
Yeah. For me, building on what both Lili and Erryn, was talking about, for me, the social impact is everything. In fact, I'm the first Black woman-owned public benefit corporation in Minnesota. And I center my work specifically on social impact as a business owner. But I'll tell you why. My great-grandmother was also an entrepreneur. So she was the candy store lady who made her own ice cream, her icy cups. And I come from a pretty big family of like 50-something first cousins. And so she made all of us work. In her garden, in her candy store, we had roles, responsibility, that's what I'm saying. You couldn't think about yourself. That was not an option because there's too many of us for her to consider. So we all had to be active. And not doing the wrong thing, but doing the right thing. So vacation Bible school, working in her garden, paper routes, church every Sunday, and she bought clothes for everybody. So you didn't have an excuse. She had everybody's shoe size, clothes size. So you either went to grandma's house because you loved her food, but you didn't want to go to church. But you knew you was gonna work. So that's great grandmother, Memphis Tucker. And she was also the first social impact leader that I've known, because she was very engaged and cared about her community. And she put love into her food and what she did. And it wasn't just about her, it was about all of us. And her investments through our lives through generations, right? Because she'd already had her children. She's dealing with her children's children. And, her children's children, just, and the broader community of people around her that she cared about. And so for me, the ability to, as a business owner, to not only care about a profit you're making, which is important, and I failed miserably as a business owner, in that I'm learning, getting better. But it was so important for me in the first 3 years of opening my business to focus on social impact, to create the consistency, the stability, because we have so many things that change in our community. A lot of things come and go. I've seen a lot of things come and go. What stays and is there for the long term, what's there for the real impact, what really cares about people, we need to get that across. So I pride myself on doing that without a real profit, because I care about the outcomes and how we impact the people we serve. I care about the way we show up. I care about if somebody has a problem with how we do things, all of that. So to me, those things are important in businesses where they intersect with the common good of an area or geographical or demographic you identify with in your work.
It looks like we are running up against the end of our time. I have been honored to participate in this conversation. To our esteemed discussants, thank you for your energy, your passion, your wisdom. This has been a real gift. And to the audience, thank you for listening. We hope that this conversation has been inspiring and heartening for you, that you will be moved to do what you're able to do in your own communities and neighborhoods, that you will find lessons in what our discussants have shared, and that you will join us in this important effort to raise up the vote. The movement we're involved in reminds us that there are so many visions for where we can go. We want the one that Kenya and Erryn and Lili have described, where everyone belongs, everyone's talents and ancestors are embraced and recognized, and in that way it will be better for everyone. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for joining us for our second virtual event in our Raising Up the Vote initiative, The Power of Allyship, presented in partnership with Target. Gender equality is not just a women's issue, it's a human issue. We hope this event has left you inspired and provided insights into how each of you can raise your voice and your vote to accelerate opportunities for women, minorities, and other marginalized communities. By working together to advocate and ally with women, we can enact the systems change needed to enable a more equal and just workplace, community, country, and planet for all. Thank you to our speakers today and to our WBDC team members who made this event happen. And a special thanks to Target Corporation. Without their generous support, the Raising Up the Vote initiative would not have been possible. And to our bronze sponsors, whose financial support allows the WBDC to provide services for businesses across the Midwest: Xcel Energy, Delta Airlines, and Cargill. Last but not least, I would be remiss in not thanking the creative and talented, generous folks at Knock Inc., who donated the creative work that you've seen throughout the campaign. Truly, their passion inspires us all. I hope you've had a chance to be listening to our Raising Up the Vote podcast series, Make Your Mark, Breaking the Glass Ceiling, Women, Voting, and Equality, where influential women share their glass ceiling stories, how they fought for their voice and their rights, became civically engaged, and changed their worlds. If not, please check us out on Apple Podcast. Make Your Mark, Breaking the Glass Ceiling. We hope that you'll join us in this important effort to raise up the vote. This movement reminds us that we all can and should, indeed we must, pick up our banner today and continue to enact necessary change as we participate in this year's elections and other elections to come. Join the movement at #RaiseUpTheVote, and please get out and vote on November 3rd, if not before. Thank you for being part of this conversation, and please visit wbdc.org to find out other opportunities to be part of our movement.
Raise your hands up. Raise them up. Hey. Come on, come on. Listen to what I say.